Cat and I'm back because what once was will be again. I do not have my thinking hat on. I have glasses because I was reading. And I sometimes wonder if I'm reading the same story as everybody else. Or the story that Mr. Martin has been presenting all along. Most importantly, some of the interviews that he's done about writing this story and the Game of Thrones series on HBO. So my last video, I talked about Daenerys and her dragons being basically WMD, weapons of mass destruction. And currently they're under the control of at least a person who can be reasoned with and who's willing to try alternative methods to ending war, including a limited use of force. But I said at the end of that Euron Greyjoy was still out there, and that he's the kind of person who would just as soon be king of ashes if he couldn't be king of anything else. And he has the Dragonbinder horn. So the question was, what happens if Daenerys and her dragons come under the sway of a madman? And when they come into Westeros, as everybody is cheering, yay, she's coming, are they coming as a liberating force, or are they coming as a conquering and destructive force? And if they come as a conquering and destructive force under the sway of a crazy man, who resists and how do they resist? And yes, what I'm setting up here is that there is going to be a clash between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, between the fire and the ice. And Jon Snow isn't just going to be out there with his sword by himself. I do believe what we're going to see is that the others are going to come past the wall. Either Jon helps figure out a way to break down the wall, such as the horn that Mance Rayder supposedly had in his possession, that people believed would wake the dragons, and if it was, or the giants, and if it was blown one more time, it would break down the wall. So I believe there's a question of that. And I think that Mr. Martin has clearly indicated that there were some changes that were going to come up in which the people that you see as heroic figures may not be clearly heroic at a later date. So we do see that Daenerys, who is ethereal and silvery with amethyst eyes, very beautiful, with her beautiful dragons that everybody's oohing and eyeing over, seems exceedingly heroic at this point. But I believe that's bound to change. And we see Jon Snow, who seems somewhat heroic, but he's definitely fallen to his lowest point, or maybe not even his lowest point. So what happens if he joins forces with ice, for instance, with the others? And I think this is an important aspect, because right at this moment, the way that we have viewed the others has been as simply an evil force that attacks unprovoked. And Mr. Martin, as well as the HBO series of Game of Thrones, has done a pretty good job at doing some magical sleight of hand. So you keep seeing Daenerys. She's learning to be a ruler and learning to use her dragons. She's only using them for good, so she seems heroic. But when you see the others, what you see are people who are blue. They look like something that's been in your freezer for 10 years. They have strange glowing eyes. They don't speak our language. They are clearly very alien looking and apparent, as opposed to Daenerys, who seems to look much closer to regular humans. And yes, they've attacked wildlings. They've attacked the crows. There was the massacre at Hardhome. So you do get this impression that they are simply a destructive force whose only purpose is to destroy mankind. With one strange exception, we saw in season 2, where Jon and the crows and Sam Tarly are above the wall, and Sam Tarly gets left behind and he's hiding behind a rock, and as the others pass by, one of them turns and looks at Sam Tarly and does nothing. So why is that? Well, I think that there is a little bit of a Terminator concept going on here, or even maybe Predator. Predator is probably the better sci-fi that would go along with that. And that is when he looked at Sam Tarly right at that moment, Sam Tarly did not present a threat. I know you're wondering, how do the others present a threat? The wildlings, for instance. And definitely the crows would present a threat because they're armed and they are definitely out to destroy people. But apparently Sam Tarly wasn't armed. And this may be true for the wildlings, who all seem to go about armed all the time. And possibly could have been seen as a threat due to the magnitude of their groupings and some of the other activities that they've undertaken while they've been to the north. I think we'll get more of that story as we go along. But again, this is that sleight of hand that we're seeing. We're just going to show you snippets of the others so that you believe right at this moment that they are just the enemy. And I think that this is something that has happened before. That, in fact, ice has met fire in battle. We get the impression from the story of Westeros that the children of the forest created these others in response to the overwhelming numbers of man, and that they felt that man broke the compact and were continuing to spread out and use resources. But really, Leaf did not get very long to explain to Bran why they did what they did. She just said, we couldn't help it, there were so many of you, we had no choice. And that's where you get that impression, and you're thinking, wow, they created a nuclear option, a weapon of mass destruction, in response to a threat that could have been negotiated with as it had in the past, and that there had been some sort of agreement, but they decided to go all in. But I don't really think that's the case. And the reason I look at that differently is because when I looked at how the others were made. So the man who was tied to the tree didn't look like he'd volunteered. But most importantly, they used a piece of dragon glass to drive through his heart and into the other tree to suck out the wintry aspect. So it was dragon glass that was in use. And then the story of the last hero, he also had a dragon steel sword. So the 8,000 years ago, whoever assisted in pushing the others back beyond the wall had a dragon steel sword. Dragon steel, dragon glass implies that there were dragons. Now you don't hear that in the story. And there might be some good reasons why you don't actually hear that there were dragons. Because many of the dragons were destroyed for a long period of time. Potentially people thought it was a myth. Or because at the end of the day, who wants to say that they formed an alliance and or were utilizing some weapon of mass destruction that almost destroyed the world? And you really get that this actually happened in two aspects. So if you look over the map of the known world and the world of ice and fire, you can look to the west or to the east, and you can see things like the Red Waste and the two dead cities. That seems pretty apparent underwent some really horrific attack, maybe a scorched earth policy, and definitely these two dead cities were dead. And then you get over a little bit further east and you see the Grey Waste, you see the Dry Deep and the Bleeding Sea, and all of these things seem to indicate some aspect of scorched earth policy or total war. The second thing that you can take away from that, in fact, is that Mr. Martin wrote a side story called The Ice Dragon, and I'll put a link down in the bottom. And in the Ice Dragon story, there's a seemingly disconnected war that is occurring between two kingdoms that have dragons in their armies, a lot of dragons. And they aren't just attacking each other, but they're attacking each other's cities, they're attacking farmlands, their towns, they're burning everything and anywhere they go to try to subdue their enemy. And this seems to go along with an idea of a scorched earth policy or total war. that when these things happen in real life, people have been known to do things like destroy water sources, salt them, drain them away, or destroy food sources, anything that would destroy the ability of the other, the enemy, to continue to prosecute war or support their military. And I think that's really what you have to take away, that there was something else in the past, and that what the Children of the Forest did was not necessarily in response to just men with their iron swords or their bronze swords, but to some other greater threat. So if in the near future, if Daenerys comes in, and I'm very sure it's not an if, it's when she comes in, and she's under the sway of Euron Greyjoy, and she's a destructive, conquering force that unleashes her dragons unrestrained against others, and I don't mean the others, but other people, and is laying waste to the land. If Jon Snow forms an alliance with the others, or somehow manages to bring down the wall to bring the others, the ice, into play against the fire, which is A Song of Ice and Fire, is he then a bad guy? Or are the others redeemed in people's eyes? Because they clearly had some other purpose or reason or rationale for doing what they were doing. You just were not presented it. And then does Daenerys become the bad guy because she's under the sway of Euron Greyjoy? And whether that's something she does voluntarily or he does so under some magical persuasion. I'm going to guess magical persuasion because, you know, she has to come out of it afterwards as not so terribly villainous due to the rest of the arc of the story. So, but are they... How would we view the dragons then? Okay? And no, by the way, go catch my Jorah the Dragon Slayer video, because this is where I believe we're going to see Jorah become Saint Jorah the Dragon Slayer. Because the dragons are going to be out of control, and it might even be that if Daenerys tries to resist, Euron Greyjoy will try to turn the dragons against her, and Jorah will believe it's his job to try to save her one last time, or maybe just to save her from herself in this ultimate destruction that she set about. Maybe he does it then, but believe me, there's going to be Saint Jorah the Dragon Slayer too. So, ice and fire, Jon Snow against Daenerys. They are not going to be a unified force at first. They're going to clash, and I do believe we are going to see Saint Jorah the Dragon Slayer. Ooh, and one last thing. Ice dragons. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later. Hit the like button, leave a comment. Appreciate it.